I was just listening to Janan Ishmael talking about biology and brains, and I had a thought which I wanted to make a note of. But I've drunk half a pint of beer and I feel drunk, so I don't even know if I'm going to be able to remember the thought. She was saying that humans and other animals don't just respond to stimuli. That we're born with brains that process and store information. And she mentioned language. We use language, and I think she practically said we use language. We use language to process and store information, and so I haven't forgotten the insight that I got from this, which was that language stores information by setting up resonances in communities, in languaging groups. And I'm thinking now that music must have been pre-linguistic. Those resonances of music, it seems to me, were around before we learned to speak, and speech is just a more or less tuneful or tuneless version of music. And the reason that I'm thinking along those lines is that I was thinking about these icaroos, which are the songs that the shaman in Peru in particular sing when they do these dietas with plants. It's as if they kind of compose a tune with the plant. And I think these tunes are called icaroos, and they learn and remember the psychedelic experience by learning the icaroo, and by repeating the icaroo they can presumably recover a memory of the psychedelic experience. And I've been thinking a lot about what happened to me when I was in hospital in Panama, and I was hallucinating. And when I read Wade Davis' book, I've started reading Wade Davis' One River. I don't know why it took me so long to get a copy of this. Well, I do partly know, because I asked Cambridge Library if they could order a copy, and they had no copy of it, and they couldn't order it. And that was when I was on the street here in Cambridge and I had no money, so And then when I got some money and got somewhere to live, I was concentrating on mathematics because I'm in Cambridge, and I thought mathematics was, but that was a mistake. Anyway, somebody watched Sandy Toksvig's talk at King's College, the Alan Turing lecture, for me, will you? Because I lost interest very early on. So, in hospital in Panama, possibly because there was actually, perhaps because they vaccinated me, they gave me one of these COVID vaccines without telling me. I don't know. The first few days I was in there, I was hallucinating, and it really sounded to me like a peyote, that these were peyote visions, and I desperately wanted some way of recording them, of making notes, and all I had was a pencil and paper that I got from one of the nurses, so I wrote a note for my daughter about it. But we were in a ward. See, what they did was, they're having their annual camp here. That must be quite nice. They have a camp every year in this field around this time. What happened was, I was admitted to hospital because I was coughing up blood, and I had severe infections in my hands, and I had a negative COVID test. So for the first hour I was in a ward of my own, because the only ward that they actually had staffed, I found out, I suspect, the only ward they had staffed was a COVID ward. And then they gave me another COVID test, and the second COVID test came up positive. So they put me in the COVID ward, and the beds, it was in a large wide building, the beds were all arranged with the head to the wall and the foot facing in, and then there was this big space, empty space, where the nurses would pass up and down. And I was lying in my bed looking out over this space, and I could see the beams up above my bed, and there were these beautiful, beautiful, intricate patterns drifting on these beams. But when I looked into the space in front of me, it was even better. It became like a limpid pool of water, but completely clear. So it had the sense of being underwater, but it was just air and light. And within this space there were all these amazing, beautiful geometric patterns. The floor would lift, and these incredibly intricate fractal regular patterns would appear and organize themselves. The whole thing was dynamic. There was nothing stationary at any time. It was continuous movement. It was as if when I looked out into the ward, the these patterns would rise and grow, and then within them I had other bizarre visions, one of which was John Cleese. It honestly looked like a really souped up intro to a Monty Python movie. John Cleese, a cartoon image of John Cleese, walked along and walked into a suit of armour and then shut the visor of the armour and kind of disappeared. And that was one of the things I told my daughter about in the note, and I gave it to my doctor, Doctora Campbell. She was Panamanian but of Scottish descent. She was descended from one of the Scottish families that settled Panama during Scotland's big dash at empire. God, that was a fiasco. Anyway, I wanted so to record these things and or have something to remember what was going on, to draw them, but I had nothing, and I was never mind. I wanted them to get me a phone, but they made all these arrangements, and then the phone only appeared after I'd been discharged from the hospital. But at the time, during these first few days, it felt to me like I could conjure up these hallucinations at will. All I had to do was look out and wait and watch, and they would start. But after 2 or 3 days, that stopped happening. But there was this indigenous girl who was alone in the room opposite me. She had a private room, and she was tripping in some way, and she wasn't enjoying it. She was saying, "He's got a knife, he's going to come." And the nurses were very unsympathetic. They just said, "Nobody's got a knife, nothing, you come sit down." Poor kid, she was only about 15 at most. So beautiful. But so Icarus and language, the insight that I had when I heard Jenna and Ishmael talking about this was that I'm sure language and that dramatic change in human cerebral arrangement, if that's what you call brains, that occurred, between Neanderthals and Homo sapiens was linguistic. Was to do with the way language was used in the society, and it co-arose with that development. So it must be ancient stuff. And this now reminds me of my first attempt to formalize probability, and I took a completely linguistic approach to it. I said it's actually about the meanings of symbols. If you take a list of symbols, you assign meanings to particular instances. That gives you a probability distribution. And it seemed to me that's all you needed. It was the mapping from the sample space to the measure space. Yeah, Janan Ishmael is just absolutely wonderful to listen to. Absolutely wonderful. So I've also been thinking I want to do a dieta, and what I'd like to do is Brugmansia. I'd like to spend a couple of days in a darkened room with no food and just Brugmansia and a really good microphone. And maybe I was thinking I'd really like one of those Andean flutes, one of those big wooden ones. I had some other very strange musical experiences in Bolivia. Once I was with a carpenter, Leodan, in Tumapasa, and he, as well as being a carpenter, he used to play cumbia in a cumbia band, and they used to put themselves up for hire at parties and things. So he actually had a keyboard, one of these commercial synths, but quite a good one. And he was tinkering away, and I said, "Oh, can I have a go?" And I used to tinker with pianos, and all I ever played was this one variation on the first bar of Beethoven's Für Elise. But this time, he said, "Yeah," and he sort of stepped aside, and I plonked out a tune, and it was cumbia. It was, I thought, pretty good cumbia. I was really amazed because I'd heard so much cumbia on buses and it is amazing music. It's got this baroque character to it. It's possible that some of those cumbia melodies go back to at least the conquistadors, kind of Baroque Spanish. Yeah. I just wish keyboards weren't so damn big. I really was thinking about buying another, one of these programmable MIDI keyboards. Some of them are quite good with velocity sensitive keys, and I mean they don't feel anything like a real piano, but the thing is that they're huge. You can't carry them around. And the little ones, maybe that's a possibility. You can plonk out a tune, but the small ones are only just one octave or maybe two. Usually just one octave. Maybe I could get good at switching, multiplexing the keyboard. don't know. No, I think it's much more portable as a wooden Andean flute. It's a plan coming together here.